Just days before my brother's wedding, my mother cornered me in the hallway. She shoved a stiff, cheap server's apron into my hands and murmured, "You're not part of this family, Rachel. You're just the hired help. Go make yourself useful." She thought she was putting a rebellious daughter in her place. She didn't realize she was speaking to a two-star general and the hidden owner of the very land beneath her heels. Her eviction notice was already waiting in my desk. My name is Major General Rachel Whitmore. I'm 38 years old, and I was on the drive home that afternoon. The tires of my Ford Expedition whispered over the blacktop, carrying me through the manicured streets of Marston, Virginia. It was fall, and the tall maples overhead blazed in gold and crimson, forming a canopy of fire over a neighborhood that no longer felt like mine. Every turn was familiar but strangely distant. After years in the dusty plains of Iraq and the sterile hallways of the Pentagon, this suburban luxury felt like stepping into a foreign nation. Then the house appeared. It looked exactly as it had when I left, a grand colonial revival mansion, its white columns gleaming in the late daylight. The emerald lawn was cut to perfection, and the white picket fence, meant to feel warm and welcoming, had always seemed more like a barricade to me, a thin painted line dividing their world from mine. I parked, cut the engine, and sat for a breath. The quiet inside the car felt like an ally. The silence waiting inside that house would be a weapon. I unlocked the front door with my own key. The air was cool and still, scented faintly of lemon polish and old money. No voice called out to greet me. My gaze went straight to the grand foyer wall, to the spot where my framed West Point graduation photo once hung, me standing straight-backed, grinning with pride. It was gone. In its place hung a huge oil painting of my mother, Margaret, alongside my younger brother, Lucas. They were frozen in some charity gala pose, her wrapped in silk, him in a tailored tuxedo, smiling with the easy confidence of people who believe their status is permanent. I had been erased. Margaret stepped out of the living room, a pale gold glass of Chardonnay in one hand, a woman in a severe black pantsuit at her side, the wedding planner, I guessed. My mother's eyes, the same shade of blue as mine but far colder, swept over me. Her gaze lingered on my plain jeans and sweater. It was an unspoken evaluation, and I failed. She spoke loudly enough for the planner to hear, playing to her audience. "Rachel, your room is upstairs next to the storage closet. Towels are in the linen cupboard. Help yourself." Without waiting for a response, she turned back to discuss flower arrangements, as though I were a courier dropping off a package. I stood for a moment in the marble-floored entryway, a ghost in the place I once called home. That evening, the performance continued. The house filled with a low, steady hum, the sound of my mother's inner circle. They were a curated collection of DC's elite, politicians, lobbyists, corporate power brokers. Expensive wine in hand, they traded favors and influence like currency. I tried making polite conversation, searching for common ground, but I felt like an anthropologist among an alien tribe. That's when Margaret glided toward me, her politician's smile fixed in place. She pressed something crisp and white into my palm, another apron. "Rachel, dear," she cooed, voice dripping with false sweetness. "You don't know most of these guests, I'm sure. Why don't you help the staff pass around the hors d'oeuvres? You've served before, haven't you?" The words hung in the air, a public verdict. A couple of nearby guests covered their mouths to hide polite snickers. I looked toward Lucas. He was deep in conversation with a senator, and when he overheard, he only shrugged a small, careless motion before turning back to his talk about his latest building project. His indifference was complicity. Heat rose up my neck, flushing my face. In that moment, I wasn't a major general who had clawed her way to 2 silver stars through grit, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. I was just a prop in a crisp white apron. The final insult came minutes later. A woman with a warm smile, one of my mother's charity friends, asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Margaret slid in, laying a possessive hand on my arm. "Oh, she has some kind of desk job for the government," she said brightly, as if describing an unremarkable hobby. "Very stable, but terribly dull." The word desk was chosen like a scalpel, meant to strip my career of its weight and polish until it was small and forgettable. My throat tightened. Breathing felt harder. I had become invisible, a servant expected to fade into the background of the real family. I didn't argue. I simply nodded to the kind woman, slipped from my mother's grasp, and walked away from the glittering crowd. My steps stayed even as I crossed the house to the kitchen, where the laughter and clinking glasses dulled behind me. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I untied the apron strings, held the stiff white fabric in my hands for a heartbeat, and dropped it into the stainless steel trash can, right on top of a heap of lemon peels. It wasn't anger. It was the quiet start of war. That night, sleep never came. In the stark quiet of the guest room, the one tucked right beside the storage closet, the image of that white apron landing in the trash kept looping in my mind. It was sharp and clear, but tangled with a single question that had followed me for over 20 years. Why, Mom? Why do you despise what I've become so much? There was only one place I could go to even begin searching for an answer. Before the sun had fully broken the horizon, I was behind the wheel of my Ford Expedition, cruising through the sleeping suburbs toward Arlington National Cemetery. A thin, ghostly mist hugged the ground, softening every shape in the dim light. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp soil and fallen leaves. The silence here was different. It wasn't the cold, strategic quiet of my mother's home. This was a silence layered with reverence, holding the weight of thousands of stories of service and sacrifice. I walked among endless rows of white marble headstones, each one a testament to a life given for something bigger than oneself. I found his marker easily. The grass around it was cut with military precision. Colonel Marcus Whitmore, United States Army. I stood before the smooth white stone, my breath clouding in the chilly air. He had been the only person who truly saw me, not as the difficult daughter or the family's oddity, but as myself. Closing my eyes, I was back on the porch as a young girl, the cool Virginia night wrapped around us. My father sat beside me, both our faces tilted to the endless black canvas above. He wasn't just naming constellations, he was teaching me how to find my way. His hand, steady and sure, traced faint star patterns across the sky. "Margaret only notices the brightest stars, Rachel," he told me in that low, steady voice. "She likes whatever glitters, whatever calls attention to itself. But a real soldier, a true navigator, knows it's the faint stars, the ones you have to search for, that guide you when you're lost in the dark. Be that faint star, sweetheart. Quiet, constant, and unshakable." His words drifted back to me now like a warm ghost in the morning mist. He had understood her nature, and in doing so had understood my place in her orbit. I was never meant for her sky. Then came a memory that still burned. The day my acceptance letter from West Point arrived, a thick envelope, solid and important in my hands. My heart had been pounding with a pure, almost weightless joy as I showed it to Margaret. She had taken it delicately, barely brushing the paper with her manicured fingers, and dropped it onto the polished dining table as though it were a sales flyer. "You're making a mistake, Rachel," she'd said flatly. "You'll turn hard, unrefined. No respectable man from Marston will want a soldier for a wife. No pride. No congratulations. Just a sentence handed down without appeal." That same week, my brother Lucas won a local school art competition, a ribbon, and a printed certificate. For that, Margaret hosted an extravagant backyard celebration for over 100 guests. There were caterers, a string quartet, champagne flowing like water, all for a child's sketch. The unfairness of it had carved itself into me, but my father had found a way to tip the balance. That evening, he'd slipped me out of the house and driven us into D.C. to Ben's Chili Bowl, a noisy, glorious chaos of sizzling grills and chatter. We sat at the counter, and he ordered 2 chili half-smokes, smothered in sauce and steaming hot. It was messy, delicious, and the most honest celebration I'd ever had. As I ate, he looked at me with the pride my mother refused to give. "Never let anyone tell you your dreams aren't worth celebrating," he'd said over the joyful noise. Not ever. Standing now at his grave, the memory was so vivid I could taste the chili. The contrast between his quiet pride and her sharp disapproval was the blueprint of my childhood. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a challenge coin from my old unit. Heavy and cool in my palm, it carried years of grit and meaning. In the tradition of soldiers, I placed it gently on the marble. The metal made a small, certain click. "Dad," I whispered into the still air, "I'm not lost. just in the dark. But I remember what you taught me. I remember the stars. I drew in a slow, steady breath. It was time to be my own guiding star, even if no one else ever saw its light. The resolve that settled in my chest wasn't the heat of revenge. It was something colder, denser, and far more enduring. A determination to honor his legacy and take back the meaning of service and honor that Margaret had tried so hard to strip from me. I stood, squared my shoulders, and turned away from the grave. The mist was lifting now, and the first light of morning was cutting through the trees, gleaming off the endless white stones. I was walking out of the shadows onto a path entirely my own, the path of that faint, constant star my father believed in. As I drove away from Arlington, I realized I had been traveling that road my entire adult life, one paved not with my mother's approval or my brother's effortless victories, but with sweat, dirt, and the heavy silence of my family. The memories didn't come gently. They struck in sharp, bright flashes. West Point. The long nights spent shivering in wet, freezing mud during field exercises still live in my bones. My muscles would scream in protest, every inch of me aching. The relentless drills pushed me so far past exhaustion that my vision narrowed to a dark tunnel. My lungs burned. My body threatened collapse. And then there was the constant, subtle condescension from certain male cadets, their polite surprise when I didn't just keep pace but outperform them in tactical exercises. That flicker in their eyes was quiet fuel, burning alongside the steady fire of my father's memory. Each hard-earned win was a silent message. I was on the right course, even if I had to walk it alone. Then came Afghanistan. The images shifted from West Point's green hills to the pale, sun-bleached terrain of Helmand Province. I was a brand new first lieutenant then, leading patrols through an isolated village. The air there was thick with dust, with tension, with the constant knowledge that danger was always close. My world had narrowed to the weight of my gear, the grip of my rifle, and the faces of soldiers who trusted me to bring them home alive. Out there, I learned a new language, one without words. I read intentions in the flicker of someone's gaze, in the slope of their shoulders, in the stillness between two distant gunshots. These were survival lessons no elite design school could ever teach my brother Lucas. He learned symmetry and form. I learned life and death. One memory from that time will never heal. It was Christmas Eve in Kandahar at a makeshift forward operating base, just hours after an ambush had taken one of my men, a young soldier from Indiana with a photograph of his high school sweetheart taped inside his helmet. I was bone-tired, grief pressing down on me, thousands of miles from anything resembling home. I managed to get a video call through. The image flickered, and suddenly I was looking into our family's living room in Marston. It could have been a magazine spread, a towering, glittering Christmas tree, a fire in the hearth. Margaret and Lucas sat with glasses of eggnog laughing. When my mother saw me, her smile faltered. My face was streaked with grime, my eyes sunken with fatigue. She sighed, a sound of mild irritation. "Oh, Rachel, you look terrible. Are you even eating? Not, are you safe? Not, are you okay?" Lucas leaned into the frame, grinning. "Hey, Rach, Mom just bought me a new Porsche for my promotion." The words hit like a blow. A man I'd led was dead in the dirt, and my brother was celebrating a luxury car. No one asked about the firefight. No one asked about my unit. Then a siren tore through the air on my end, the bone-deep sound of incoming rockets. I had to cut the call. The last thing I heard before shutting the laptop was my mother's voice turning to Lucas. "Come on, let's pick your outfit for the club's New Year's party." The screen went black. The siren halt. The silence inside me was worse. Years later, I sat in the anonymous comfort of a Starbucks, just a few miles from that same house. The warm smell of roasted coffee and sugar was a far cry from the grid of Kandahar. My encrypted government laptop hummed softly as I sifted through emails, a quiet proof of the life my family refused to acknowledge. One message invited me to give a keynote at a global security conference in London. Another was a commendation from the Pentagon for an intelligence brief I'd written, a brief that had shaped national policy. My work mattered. It was respected at the highest levels. I took a slow sip of black coffee, and a wry smile tugged at my lips. To the outside world, I was a general, a strategist, a leader. In the grand colonial mansion down the road, I was still the daughter not worth celebrating, the one best suited to fetch towels and wear an apron. The world saw a general. My family saw a ghost. That truth was settling in my chest when a new email slid into my inbox. The subject line was simple, coffee. But the sender's name made my pulse skip, Ava Russo. I knew her. Captain Ava Russo, Lucas's fiancée. The message was short, a time, a place, a coffee shop in DuPont Circle. No explanation. My instincts, sharpened by years of threat assessments, told me this wasn't a social meetup. It was reconnaissance. The next afternoon, I found the cafe tucked away on a quiet side street. Mismatched furniture, local art, the hum of an espresso machine. A world apart from the sterile perfection of my mother's world. Ava was already seated at a corner table. She wore civilian clothes, a simple sweater and jeans, but the unmistakable posture of a soldier lingered in her shoulders. She rose as I walked in. "General," she greeted me, her tone low but steady. "Captain," I answered, taking the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming." There was no small talk. Her eyes locked on mine, calm and unwavering. "Ma'am, I know what's going on with your mother, with Margaret." She said my mother's name with a cool, almost clinical detachment. "She's always been like this. I need you to understand I'm not part of it." I listened, keeping my face unreadable. She leaned in slightly. "A little over a year ago, after Lucas started bragging about his family's success, I ran a professional verification on you. I know exactly who you are, General. I served under you in Kandahar. You pulled my unit out of an ambush in the Arghandab Valley. You saved my life." A sharp jolt went through me. I remembered the mission, but in the chaos of command, individual faces blurred. For her, it was the day she lived. For me, it had been another Tuesday in the war. For the first time, I didn't see her as my brother's fiancée. I saw her as a soldier. A quiet, unexpected warmth spread in my chest, the kind I hadn't felt in years. "I owe you everything," Ava said, conviction threading through every word. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm your soldier, on any battlefield. Including this one." Her sincerity was a balm over an old wound I hadn't realized was still raw. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone in the foxhole. Then she slid a small slip of paper across the table. "There's someone you need to meet," she said. On it, a name and address in Alexandria, Dr. Maya Singh. "She's retired now, but she knows your mother. And she's on our side." The following afternoon, I drove to the address, a discreet brownstone with a modest plaque that read Mage Consultant. Inside, it was nothing like a therapist's office. No soft sofas, no framed quotes on the wall. This was a war room. Maps of global hotspots covered one wall. A whiteboard scrawled with complex diagrams and timelines dominated another. The woman behind the desk rose as I entered. Silver-streaked black hair pulled back, sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "General Whitmore," she said warmly, but with a businesslike edge. Ava called ahead. "Please sit." She poured 2 cups of Earl Grey and got straight to it. "I've known Margaret Whitmore for 3 decades, through boards and committees. I've studied how she operates." Her gaze held mine. "This isn't some petty family dispute, Rachel. Your mother is running a coordinated information warfare campaign, erasing your identity and claiming your father's legacy. And we're going to fight back with the same weapons, truth and precision." The word we settled into the room like an anchor. Maya reached into a drawer and placed 2 items between us, a slim digital voice recorder and a black encrypted USB drive. "Margaret works in whispers and private lies," she said. "From now on, you gather evidence. Record everything. Document every word. We're building a case, your case." That night, the 3 of us, a major general, a captain, and a retired DI strategist, sat in Maya's war room. No tears, no dramatics. Only strategy. Ava used her access to pull up floor plans and security schematics for the wedding venue. Maya began drafting a timeline, flagging influential guests, journalists, politicians, power brokers, who could tip the balance. I supplied the history, the patterns, the psychological profile of the woman we were going to dismantle. For the first time, the tide felt like it was turning. The lonely path of the dim star was no longer mine alone. A new constellation had formed. Our battle plan was clear. Take down Margaret Whitmore's empire, not with rage, but with cold, irrefutable fact. 2 days after that strategy session, my phone lit up with her number. Her voice was warmer than I'd heard in decades, the sweetness of bait on a hook. She wanted dinner. Just the two of us. A chance to reconnect before the wedding chaos. Every instinct screamed trap. But Maya's voice echoed in my head. Gather intelligence. I'd like that, I said, keeping my own tone even. Before leaving my temporary apartment, I took out the slim voice recorder Maya had given me. With a quiet click, it came to life before I slid it into my clutch. I wasn't going to dinner as a daughter. I was going as an operative entering hostile ground. Margaret had chosen the inn at Little Washington, a legendary 3-Michelin-star sanctuary of polished elegance deep in the Virginia countryside. Public. Controlled. The kind of place senators and CEOs favored, where no one dared cause a scene. A deliberate choice. She was already seated when I arrived, draped in a silk dress with a single pearl strand at her throat. That practiced smile was flawless, warm enough for an audience, but empty at the edges. "Rachel, darling, you look well," she said, her eyes flicking over my simple black dress, a silent assessment wrapped in a pause. The meal was a masterwork on a plate. Course after course appeared, each plate a miniature sculpture meant more for admiration than nourishment. Herb-crusted lamb carpaccio crowned with a delicate curl of Caesar salad ice cream. A single seared scallop under a drizzle of black truffle vinaigrette. Between bites of food that tasted like air, Margaret delivered her performance. She spoke of the importance of family, how we needed to remain united. She plucked a few soft-focus memories from my childhood, dressing them up like treasures, moments that felt borrowed from someone else's life. She claimed pride in my career, though she hadn't always known how to show it. It was a flawless act, counterfeit warmth wrapped around carefully engineered lies. Every sentence was another smooth stone laid along a path I had no intention of following. The air grew heavy with her false sincerity. My stomach knotted, cold and hard. I wasn't dining with my mother. I was facing an interrogator who'd mastered the art of disarming her targets. Then dessert arrived, a towering 7-layer coconut cake, as polished as the performance. Alongside it came the real reason I'd been summoned. Margaret reached into her designer clutch and withdrew a neatly clipped folder. She set it beside my plate with the same casual grace one might place a napkin. "Just a small matter of paperwork, dear," she murmured, her voice dropping to a conspirator's whisper. "To consolidate the family assets. It will make things much easier to manage, and it will help Lucas enormously with his ventures after the wedding. All you need to do is sign." My eyes dropped to the folder. My pulse thudded in a steady, heavy rhythm. This wasn't consolidation. It was an ambush. I felt the weight of the tiny recorder in my clutch. Heard Maya's voice in my head. "Never sign anything without your lawyer's review." I opened the folder. Pages dense with legal jargon blurred before me, but certain phrases sliced through the haze. Relinquish all claims. Irrevocable transfer of title. This wasn't about simplifying management. This was a clean erasure, a legal severing of my last tangible tie to my father, his house. Blood roared in my ears. She was trying to steal my father's legacy over a plate of expensive cake. I steadied my breath, closed the folder, and slid it back across the table. "I'll need my lawyer to review this first, Mother." The effect was immediate. Her perfected smile froze, then fractured. The warmth in her eyes dropped away, replaced by shards of ice. "A lawyer," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "Rachel, we are family. Don't you trust your own mother?" Classic tactic, wrap manipulation in the language of loyalty. "This is a simple family matter," she pressed. "Don't be difficult. Just sign it." Her hand moved suddenly, fingers pressing on the folder, an order masquerading as a suggestion. I looked at her hand, then back at the barely restrained fury in her face, and for the first time I felt no shame. No hurt. Only cold, unshakable clarity. The game was laid bare. I rose slowly, controlled. From my clutch, I pulled a $100 bill and set it neatly on the table, more than enough for my share and the tip. "I'll have my attorney return it after he's reviewed it," I said, my voice steady as steel. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't glance back, though I could feel her glare scorching the space between us. My heels clicked softly across polished floors as the conversations and silverware clinks faded into static. By the time the cool night air hit my face, I knew without question the battle had begun. And I had fired the opening shot. Back at my temporary apartment, I didn't waste a second. I laid the folder on the coffee table, photographed each page with my phone, and sent them to Maya with a single subject line: tonight's dinner conversation. The recorder's audio file was already uploading to our encrypted drive when I sank into the quiet. A few hours later, Maya called. Her voice, usually smooth, measured, carried a blade's edge. Rachel, I had my legal contact review the photos. This isn't a power of attorney. It's a full, unconditional waiver of your inheritance rights to the house. Ironclad. Drafted by an attorney who specializes in family disputes. The nausea rose fast. I had suspected. Now it was confirmed. She had come to strip me of everything. Right then, my phone buzzed with a text from Ava. No words, just a link. I tapped it. The page loaded to a glossy Virginia society blog, one of those chroniclers of the DC elite. The headline blared in self-righteous font. The Whitmore family and the prodigal daughter, a sad tale. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, anonymously sourced, but every sentence dripping with my mother's fingerprints. The article cast me as a difficult, withdrawn daughter who had abandoned her family for some vague, suspect career. It hinted, with a precision born of malice, that my years in uniform had left me unstable, prone to jealousy over Lucas's upcoming marriage. It accused me outright of trying to sabotage the wedding. But the blow that truly froze my blood was the photo. They had dug up an old image taken after a grueling 70-hour mission in a combat zone. My face was smeared with dirt, my eyes hollow from exhaustion. They had cropped it close, blown it up, and used it as their proof of the unhinged veteran. It was a violation so deep it stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't just an attempt to cut me out of an inheritance. They meant to erase me, to discredit me so completely that no one would ever believe anything I said again. My years of service, my sacrifices, the very fabric of my identity, turned into weapons aimed at my own chest. I dropped my phone onto the couch as if it burned. The living room was dark, the city lights outside blinking like they were in on the joke. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down, the lies, the betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty. I felt the floor give way beneath me. Then my father's voice came back, speaking of dim stars. Maya's voice telling me to fight with truth. Ava's promise to stand with me. I was not alone. I reached for my laptop. My movements were stiff at first, then steadier. I opened my browser and typed, Breen Brown, the man in the arena. I pulled up her Netflix special, The Call to Courage, fast-forwarding to the words I needed. Her voice filled the silence, strong and sure, quoting Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the one who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who, at the best, knows the triumph of achievement, and who, at the worst, fails while daring greatly. I closed my eyes and let it sink into my bones. The critics, Margaret, Lucas, their hollow circle, the faceless blogger, were nothing but spectators in the cheap seats, safe and smug. They'd never stepped foot in the fight. I had lived in the arena my entire adult life. My face had been streaked with the dust of Afghanistan. My hands knew the grit of the fight. I had stumbled. I had bled. And I had dared greatly. When I opened my eyes, the fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, unshakable clarity. They had shoved me out of the family circle, and in doing so, they had pushed me straight back where I belonged, the battlefield. And if you've ever been in that moment, you know exactly what it feels like, the instant the pain stops and purpose takes over. I picked up my phone, my hand rock steady now, and dialed Maya. She answered on the first ring. Activate everything, I said, my voice flat with resolve. It's time to step into my arena. Those weren't words of request. They were an order. The response was immediate. The next 2 days blurred into focused, relentless preparation. Maya's quiet Alexandria office transformed into a full command center. The whiteboard, once covered in abstract sketches, was now a detailed battle plan. At the center, the floor plan of the hotel ballroom, marked with entry and exit points, camera blind spots, and sightlines. Ava, drawing on her technical expertise, secured the schematics for the venue's AV system, giving us the ability to control every microphone and projector in the building. We moved with the precision of a military unit. Maya tapped her network, compiling a list of high-value guests, not just the powerful, but the influential. She flagged 3 national journalists and several well-connected social media figures who could detonate a story in minutes. A digital dossier containing all our evidence was encrypted, ready for deployment at the exact second it would do the most damage. She had already primed a veteran investigative reporter from a major paper to expect a package at a set hour. Ava became my intel officer, tracking the online spread of the smear piece, charting its trajectory. She built a detailed timeline of the wedding day, pinpointing choke points, seating arrangements, and moments of opportunity. Every variable was cataloged, every weakness mapped. My job was command, and my first move was securing our most critical reinforcement. On a secure line, I called General Alastair Vance, my former commanding officer, now a 4-star at the Pentagon. No backstory, no appeals, just the facts. A precise, military-style briefing on a coordinated disinformation campaign targeting a senior officer. "Sir, I require 2 assets," I said, my tone even and controlled. "The unredacted after-action report for Operation Desert Aegis and an official video confirmation of my service record and commendations from the Pentagon." A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. General Vance was a man who measured his words, but whose loyalty ran deeper than politics. He didn't need the subtext explained. "You'll have them on a secure server within the hour, Major General," he said finally, his voice a mix of gravel and iron. "It's long past time the full account of what you and your soldiers accomplished in that valley was properly acknowledged." He didn't ask why. He didn't press for details. That was the bond of the uniform, an understanding my mother would never fathom. The night before the wedding, sleep was a foreign concept. Alexandria's city lights bled through the blinds, but my attention was locked on the task before me. From its garment bag, I withdrew my Class A dress blues, the uniform reserved for ceremony, tradition, and honor. Under the desk lamp's stark glow, I began the ritual of preparation. I laid out the jacket, each decoration ready to be affixed with precision. The silver star, earned during the same ambush where Ava had lived, because my unit refused to break. The Purple Heart, for shrapnel torn into my shoulder in another firefight, a story I'd never shared at home. The Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star. Each ribbon, each medal was a piece of my life my mother had tried to erase. They weren't props. They were a metallic language that told the truth, a history written in sweat, blood, and endurance. I took up my portable steamer, the hiss of vapor filling the room as I smoothed every seam, sharpened every crease. The brass buttons gleamed like freshly minted coins. The 2 silver stars on each epaulette caught the light with a cold, resolute gleam. This was more than preparation. This was transformation. I was shedding the role of the difficult daughter they had draped over me. I was stepping back into my own skin. When I finished, the uniform hung in perfect form, a silent effigy of discipline and defiance. Margaret had chosen her weapons: lies, manipulation, public humiliation. I had chosen mine. I wasn't dressing for a wedding. I was preparing for a reckoning. The next morning, the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons in Washington, D.C. shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Pastel silks swirled. Black tuxedos gleamed. A string quartet floated through something light and classical, the soundtrack to the merger of 2 powerful families. Lucas stood at the altar, radiating polished confidence. My mother, seated in the front row, was the image of the serene matriarch, her expression a masterwork of composed pride. The ceremony began. The procession ended. The officiant was welcoming the guests when the grand oak doors at the back of the room swung open. It wasn't a late-arriving guest in chiffon. It was me. I stepped through, and the silence moved like a shockwave from the doorway outward. The quartet faltered mid-note. The hum of 300 guests collapsed into nothing. I wasn't in a gown. I was in my armor. The deep blue of my service uniform was immaculate, brass buttons catching the chandelier light. Rows of ribbons flared with color against the fabric, telling the story they'd tried to bury. The twin silver stars on each shoulder burned under the lights. I saw my mother's face. Her serene mask fractured, the color draining until her skin was the pale shade of porcelain about to shatter. Lucas's jaw slackened, the confident set of his shoulders folding inward as shock and recognition took hold. I didn't acknowledge them. My spine was straight, my pace measured. I walked the length of the aisle without pause and took a seat in the last row. Hands folded in my lap, I became a silent, immovable presence, a shadow in their perfect tableau. The ceremony limped forward. The air now waited with unspoken questions. The officiant stumbled through the vows, skipping over pauses. When he reached the inevitable line, "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," the silence turned electric. No one spoke, but the objection was already in the room, woven into every stolen glance. Then came the family remarks. Margaret rose, still visibly rattled, clutching the edges of her composure like a silk shawl about to slip through her fingers. I knew whatever she was about to deliver had been scripted and rehearsed. But she never made it to the microphone. Someone else was already there. The bride. Captain Ava Russo, radiant in an elegant white gown, stepped up to the lectern. She was breathtaking, but there was nothing soft in her expression, only solemn resolve. She didn't glance at Lucas. She didn't sweep her gaze over the guests. She turned her body toward the back row. Toward me. The room went still. "Before I begin my new life," Ava said, her voice strong and clear, carrying easily through the microphone, "I must first honor the person who gave me the chance to have this life at all." She straightened, shoulders squared in that perfect posture only a soldier could carry. Then, in her wedding dress, she brought her hand sharply to her brow in a precise, flawless military salute. "To Major General Rachel Whitmore," she declared. The title detonated in the air. A collective gasp rippled across the ballroom. My mother's face twisted, the kind of silent scream that strips the color from skin. But Ava wasn't finished. She dropped her salute and continued, her voice ringing with absolute truth. "The general seated in the back row is the woman who saved my life, and the lives of 5 other soldiers, during Operation Desert Aegis in Kandahar." Right on cue, the massive screen behind the altar, which moments before had shown a looping monogram of the bride and groom's initials, flickered and changed. The monogram vanished. In its place, the unredacted after-action report of the mission. My name, my rank, my signature. Then came the photos. Me in the field, dust in my hair. Me with my unit. Me receiving the Silver Star. Each decoration on my chest, named and explained. And finally, the video. General Alistair Vance appeared in full dress uniform, staring directly into the camera. His voice was unflinching as he confirmed my rank, my service record, and the exact circumstances of my commendations. At the same moment, Maya hit send from her command center. Around the room, the phones of every journalist began to buzz and chime. The dossier was in their hands. Margaret's carefully engineered world fractured in real time. She shot from her chair, the mask ripped away, her voice raw and jagged. "Stop this. It's a lie. All of it's a lie." She lunged toward the stage, desperate to halt the inevitable. But it was already too late. From the stunned quiet, a single clap broke the air. Then another. And another. It spread, slow at first, then rising into a rolling thunder of applause that shook the crystal chandeliers. Guests rose to their feet, not for the couple, but for the soldier in the back row. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding a hero. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, letting the sound wash over me. In the aftermath of that ovation, an eerie stillness settled inside me. The adrenaline drained, leaving a deep, hollow exhaustion. I slipped out in the chaos, leaving the wreckage of my family's perfect facade behind. The next morning, the storm truly broke. Front page, above the fold, The Washington Post. The Invisible General. Pentagon confirms heroism of officer hidden by own family. The name stuck. Within hours, every major network had picked up the story. The dossier went viral. The blog post that had tried to destroy me became a case study in malicious deceit. Margaret's social empire didn't just crack, it collapsed. Her charity boards quietly requested her resignation. Invitations to elite DC galas vanished. The powerful friends who once filled her guest lists now ignored her calls. Her currency, her reputation was gone. The wedding was canceled. Ava returned the oversized diamond ring to Lucas that night, leaving it on the hotel suite table. She was free. 2 days later, Lucas appeared at my apartment. He looked wrecked, hair unkempt, suit wrinkled, shadows under his eyes. He stood in my doorway not with contrition, but with accusation. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice thin with disbelief. "Everything? Did you have to do it like that?" I looked at him, the boy I had once shielded on the playground, the man I'd tried to love despite the wall Margaret had built between us. And for the first time, I saw him without distortion. Not as a casualty, as a collaborator. I saw the entitlement, the weakness, the selfishness that had let him watch me be erased over and over. There was no regret in his eyes, only self-pity. The last thread of sisterly affection inside me withered and broke. "No, Lucas," I said, my voice calm, stripped of the anger he clearly expected. "I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights. Mom's lies and your silence, your complicity, that's what ruined everything. You chose your side a long time ago." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish grasping for air. No words came. He wasn't stunned by the accusation. He was stunned by the absence of heat, by the fact my words carried no invitation for debate. They were simply truth. I closed the door gently in his face. The click of the lock was final, the end of a chapter one should have finished years earlier. The last matter to resolve was my father's house, the stage for so many of Margaret's social performances. My attorney, a sharp and unflinching man recommended by Maya, drafted and sent the official notice. It wasn't an eviction. That would have been vengeance, and my mission was about justice. It was surgical. The document informed Margaret that, as the legal owner, I would not force her to leave. Instead, effective immediately, she would pay monthly rent, set at the full market rate for a property of that size in Marston, Virginia. The figure was substantial. Every cent of that rent would be transferred directly from her account into the Colonel Marcus Whitmore Legacy Fund, a charitable trust one had established to provide scholarships for the children of fallen and wounded service members. My father's home would no longer stand as a monument to vanity and empty prestige. It would become what he would have wanted, a legacy of service. It would educate children, support families like ours, who had given to this country and paid the cost. She could remain in her palace, but it was now a gilded cage, a monthly reminder of her defeat. She would be financing the very values she had spent her life scorning. My boundary was drawn. It wasn't built from stone or anger, but from truth, justice, and the law, a wall she could never break. In the quiet of my apartment, I finally understood what real inheritance meant. It wasn't property. It was the strength to guard what matters. The storm eventually passed. The headlines faded. And in the stillness that followed, I learned the true shape of peace. It wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the alignment of the self. The war for recognition was over, because I no longer needed it from anyone else. Months later, an invitation arrived that felt like a message from my father himself. I'd been asked to deliver the keynote address at the United States Military Academy's graduation ceremony. Standing on the historic rostrum at West Point, looking out at the long gray line of cadets in their immaculate uniforms, I felt my father's pride like a steady presence beside me. This was the stage he had dreamed of for me. But I didn't speak to them about conventional warfare. They would learn enough of that soon. "We train you here for the battlefields of the world," I told them, my voice steady over the podium. "But sometimes, the hardest arena you will ever stand in is the one within your own home. The bravest act you may face is not under enemy fire, but speaking truth to the people who are supposed to love you. Honor is not just a word stitched into a flag. It is a boundary you must defend to keep your soul intact. Looking into their young faces, I felt something startling, a deep, unshakable peace. I was handing them the map my father had once tried to draw for me in the stars. When I returned to my DC apartment, an email waited in my inbox. It wasn't from the Pentagon or a news outlet. It was from a small nonprofit I had been quietly funding for years, Solace for Soldiers' Kids. Attached was a short video. I clicked play. A young woman appeared, standing in a modest dorm room, a college banner hanging behind her. Her smile was shy but radiant. "Hi," she began. "My name is Sarah. My dad was Sergeant David Jensen. He was killed in Iraq. I was told this video might reach the anonymous donor who funded my scholarship." She took a breath, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. My whole life, people have looked at me with pity. My mom works 2 jobs. College always felt impossible. But you believed in me. Thank you for believing when no one else did." The screen went dark. I sat there in the quiet, tears streaming down my cheeks, not of grief, not of anger, but of pure contentment. The front pages, the ovations, even my mother's forced surrender, none of it mattered as much as this moment. A single, heartfelt thank you from a girl I would never meet. This was it. This was my real legacy. Not the medals on my chest, but the quiet, unseen impact I could have on a life. The kind of difference that comes without applause, without credit. I was my father's dim star. And at last, I was guiding someone home. Turning back to my laptop, the Potomac River stretched outside my window, calm, steady, eternal. I opened a blank document. I no longer had anything to prove. The war was over. But there was one mission left. I needed to tell this story. Not for fame. Not for revenge. Not even for vindication. But for the other soldiers still out there. For the forgotten sons and daughters. For anyone standing alone in their own arena, feeling unseen. My fingers rested on the keys. Then I began to type. They say home is where the heart is. But sometimes you have to leave home to find your heart again. This was my story, and I chose to tell it because I knew I wasn't the only one who had fought a battle in silence.